Reacting to your MMA hot takes. Now, over 400 people sent me an MMA hot takes last night. Some of you even private messaged me that I need to get to, and hopefully I could turn this into a bit of a series. As you can imagine, I might not read out your hot take today due to the fact that, well, I'm not going to sit here and read over 400 hot takes. I could do it, but I can't be arsed and I don't really have the time. So I do apologise, but I'm very, very grateful to everyone that sent some hot takes in. Tune in for next week and maybe yours will be included. You never know. And without further ado, let's get to the newest hot takes. So one of the absolute most debated hot takes of all time, and I don't know whether this is a hot take, to be absolutely honest with you, is Jon Jones is not in the GOAT debate. Now, a lot of these hot takes involve Jon Jones, whether it's his being underestimated against Tom Aspinall, overestimated against Tom Aspinall, whether he won't fight Tom, whether he will fight Tom, him not fighting Tom affecting his legacy. Just a lot of Jon Jones hot takes, but one of the best ones and one of the most contentious ones is Jon Jones is not in the GOAT debate. Now, Jon Jones is not my favourite fighter, right? He's not. I like Jon Jones as a fighter. As a person, I don't know the bloke. Obviously, he's been in a lot of controversies. But as a mixed martial artist, one of the best ever, right? That can't be denied. That's objectively true. But is he excluded from the GOAT debate? Well, a lot of people that rightfully mention that Jon Jones has been popped for PEDs in the Daniel Cormier 2 rematch. And of course, he had that slight controversy that was quickly broken down by Dana White. And I think it was a leader of USADA or something, the head of USADA, when he failed and got caught with pictograms or picograms in his system. And look, this is the thing with Jon Jones. If you don't include Jon Jones in your GOAT debate because he failed PED test failures, that's fair enough. That's fair enough. I think you look at his career overall, and even after the PED test failure, where he's come back and not looked as good, he's still had a long win streak. You know, he's still beaten the newest generation of fighters. Even though it was controversial with Dominic Reyes, I think that fight really could have gone either way. And he got the win against Dominic Reyes, against Cyril Gane, and moving up a division, taking on Cyril Gane, who people often rewrite the Cyril Gane fight, in my opinion. They rewrite history with that fight and be like, oh, Gane never stood a chance. No, a lot of people, a lot of content creators picked against Cyril Gane, picked for Cyril Gane, pardon me, against Jon Jones to beat him. Now, I always say, Jon Jones' career, 2-division champion, several championship wins. He's beaten 4 generations of fighters. He's never technically lost. He lost to Matt Hamill, but he lost to Matt Hamill by beating the shit out of him. He just accidentally angled his elbows wrong. Do you know what I mean? That was the difference between smashing Matt Hamill to a TKO win and smashing Matt Hamill to a disqualification loss. Do you know what I'm trying to say? So I would include Jon Jones in the GOAT debate. It's a contentious one. If you don't include him though, especially because of the PED test failures, that's the only reason I can see why you wouldn't include him. If you do include, just forget about the PED test failure and you include longevity, he has it. You include names, he has it. You include some finishes, he has some. He has some. You include accolades, he's got them. You know, 4 generations of fighters, 2-division champion, most championship wins in the history of the sport. At the highest level, Jon Jones has got to be in the GOAT debate for me, no doubt about it. We've got a next comment in from Will, who says, prime Tony Ferguson in quotation marks. This means he doesn't rate Tony Ferguson, I do believe. Would lose to Khabib, Oliveira, Islam Makhachev, Arman Tsarukyan. I think he even included Beneil Dariush and some other contenders in there, Volkanovski too. And I'm assuming this kind of goes into the fact that he thinks prime Tony Ferguson was overrated. He included Gaethje and Poirier in there as well. Right, so here's the thing with Tony Ferguson. Unfortunately, his prime is sort of, it gets clouded. Some people, I think, massively overreact when they talk about Tony Ferguson's prime. That's just my opinion. When people say like, oh God, he would have beaten Khabib, I don't think he would have beat Khabib. I actually don't think that fight would have been close. And I do agree with this comment in that sense. Could he have beaten, in his prime, a Dustin Poirier? Yes, absolutely, I think he could have. I don't think he would have. I actually think Dustin Poirier's combinations would be way too precise. And Ferguson would rely way too much on his chin. I think he'd suffer a similar sort of beating to the Gaethje fight, but just earlier on in his career. He could overwhelm Poirier. Poirier can be smothered against the fence, and I do think it'd be a war. I just think his face and the damage would be like the Gaethje fight. Even if it's a close fight, he would sustain a lot of damage in that fight. And Dustin Poirier is a very technical finisher. But prime Tony Ferguson was a very, very good grappler. He was very dangerous. He had a good darce. He had a lot of offense and different angles he had on the feet. The thing with Tony Ferguson in his prime that kind of gets muddied is how fearless he was. If you go look at the Edson Barboza fight when Barboza was a killer, he was an absolute marauder. People forget, man, he was a marauder back in those days. Edson Barboza got smothered by Tony Ferguson. Not one time did Tony Ferguson respect his distance. Not one time did Tony Ferguson respect anything Edson Barboza had for him. Just different looks, constantly playing at his own game. He's very, very hard to read, Tony Ferguson. Anthony Pettis found that the hard way. Kevin Lee found that out the hard way. Edson Barboza found that out the hard way. All I will say is, some of his best wins. Kevin Lee at one point was considered one of Tony Ferguson's best wins, but Kevin Lee took that fight with a bad staph infection and he won the first round. And to be honest with you, if he didn't have staph infection at that point in Kevin Lee's career where he was hungry, he was motivated, he was getting better, I think he might have ended up going on to beat Tony. He really, really faded because of that staph infection. He just almost had nothing left when Tony Ferguson finished him in that fight. He just completely gassed out. And that win really hasn't aged well for Tony. Kevin Lee has been proven not to be a top-level UFC fighter. He's been proven not to have anywhere near the ability we thought he did from that Ferguson fight. And, you know, Anthony Pettis, he probably wasn't in his prime when Tony Ferguson beat him either. Pettis gave him a really good fight. Even Cowboy Cerrone, way out of his prime when Ferguson fought him, gave Ferguson a good fight. And then, of course, people often look at the Ferguson fight with Gaethje and they're like, that's the point where Gaethje knocked Ferguson out of his prime. I don't think he was in his prime in the Gaethje fight, though. I don't think he was in his prime in that fight. I think he was still aggressive and he was still fearless, but I don't even think he looked in his prime necessarily in the Cerrone fight. So it's kind of hard to say for me. I think maybe pre-Wire Trip was Tony Ferguson's prime. I don't think he would have beaten Khabib. I definitely don't think he would have beat Islam Makhachev. Volkanovski would 100% outclass him, although Ferguson's power and sort of output could give him problems, and his physicality too. Oliveira would 100% outclass him, just as he did out of his prime. Just maybe a bit more of a difficult fight. Beneil Dariush, I don't agree with that one. That's a step too far. Like it's okay for me to get the Armans, the Islam Makhachevs, the Khabibs involved, but I don't think Beneil Dariush would have beat a prime Tony Ferguson. Ferguson was a lot more aggressive off his back in his prime. He was a lot more dangerous with his jiu-jitsu, a lot more switched on from his guard. Beneil Dariush can get very passive when he's on top position, so he might even end up losing the fight from top. You never know. Ferguson's also got way too much aggression and output and power in his prime for someone like Beneil Dariush, who I don't think is at that top contender level, which Tony Ferguson is. But prime Gaethje, prime Poirier, prime Khabib, prime Islam Makhachev, prime Sarukian, prime Oliveira, and whoever else I've missed off there, prime Volk, they are hard fights for Tony, and I think they would all beat him, to be honest with you. We've got our next hot take from David. Now, this is another John Jones hot take. John Jones, as much as it pains him to say, will still beat Tom Aspinall, and as much as he's still a duck, in David's opinion, Aspinall will still lose that fight. Now, yes, unfortunately, this is a very, very, as a British man, as an English man, a very real possibility. John Jones might very well be far too skilled for someone like Tom Aspinall. But what I will say about this is, I disagree. I think the fight's already been won with Tom Aspinall. Now, I'm not saying John Jones is scared of Tom, but what I will say about this fight is, for one reason or another, John Jones doesn't want to fight Tom. He didn't want to fight Tom originally. He wanted to fight Alex Pereira after Stipe. He almost doesn't value Tom. It almost feels like he's struggling to sort of get the motivation to fight Tom. Maybe the only motivation he has now is to prove everybody wrong and shut everybody up, which is more than enough. But Tom Aspinall's younger. He's in his absolute prime. This is a prime at his best. Absolute prime Tom Aspinall. He's looking better than ever. He's an absolute assassin on the feet. He's powerful. He hits hard. He's got speed. He's got good wrestling. He's got good grappling. He's confident. He's knocking everybody in that heavyweight division out in one round. He's got the physicality Jon Jones has never faced before. This is someone who isn't as long as Jon, who isn't as tall as Jon, but is still as big as he is weight-wise, if not heavier. Someone who's maybe as strong as he is, if not stronger. In the clinch, you might see that difference in youth, athleticism and power, something that Jon Jones has just never faced before. And I think Tom Aspinall being an unknown quantity actually doesn't help Jon, who likes to have long training camps to prepare. I really believe that's why he wanted 6 months at first for the Aspinall fight, because he really probably felt like he needed to be safe in this fight and secure and prepare well for Tom. But the problem is you can't really prepare for Tom. We've not seen any adversity for Tom, really, since the Curtis Blades fight and way earlier in his career when he got submitted. And that's way earlier. He's a completely different fighter now. You know, against the Curtis Blades, that was a fluke. That was a fluke. But really, offensively from Tom, we've only ever really seen a 1-2. We've not really seen much from him. We know he's got fast head movement. We know he's got good double head takedown. We know he's got decent fast combinations. But we've not really seen a ton from his arsenal. And for all we know, he might not have a very good arsenal, or he might have an even bigger arsenal than we thought. And I think that being an unknown quantity, that inability for Jon Jones to prepare for him, coupled with the fact that, look, every great champion has their day, including Jon Jones. And Jon Jones didn't look good against Stipe, I don't think. I think he looked a lot better than Stipe, but Stipe was absolutely done, which is why nobody wanted to see that fight. He was absolutely shot going into that fight against Tom Aspinall. He almost had nothing left. He looked so slow, his timing was way off, and he was still able to land decent combinations on Jon. Tom Aspinall is so much faster. He's so much more efficient at placing his power with many different punches. I just think he's going to beat Jon Jones. I think it's inevitable. It's written in the stars. It's the young champion coming up against the older champion, and more often than not, the younger champion wins. Even Jon Jones, as good as he is, every dog has its day, and Jon Jones' day was a few years ago. I think now is Tom Aspinall's time. One of the more interesting ones, right? But Dustin Poirier is not a top 10 boxer in the UFC. Now, here's what I'm about to say when it comes to this take, because I don't think it's actually a terrible take. I don't think Dustin Poirier is anywhere near as good of a boxer as Ilia Topuria. I don't think he's near as good as a boxer as Jack Della Maddalena. And I don't think he's a better boxer than Petr Yan. And I think Sean O'Malley might even have better hands than he does. If you go look at the form in Sean O'Malley's shots, his shot selection, he's more of a kickboxer, but the way he places his punches is a lot better. If you go look at like Conor McGregor's currently not active right now, so I guess that doesn't count. But I was going to say Conor McGregor had better boxing than Dustin, in my opinion. With Petr Yan, very good fundamentals, very good guard manipulation. He's more offensive tools and more well-rounded as a boxer than Dustin Poirier. But what I will say again with Petr Yan, similar to Sean O'Malley, he's much more of a mixed martial artist / kickboxer. He doesn't just box, but his boxing is ridiculously good. Very good counters, very good head movement. He's very good at doing what he does. I think Joshua Van on the come up looks like a pretty decent boxer. He's just head movement. That head movement side of things sort of lets him down, and he needs a couple of elite level wins. Steve Erceg, I thought, was a really good boxer, but really Steve Erceg, Brandon Moreno, I will say, looked like a very, very good boxer in his most recent fight against Steve Erceg. I would say right now Brandon Moreno has better boxing than Dustin Poirier. I really do think that. His boxing looks on point. His angles, his head movement, his guard, his parries looks awesome against Steve Erceg, who's a very capable boxer in his own right. So there are a couple I see being better than Dustin. And look, Ilia Topuria, in my mind, some people always mention to me, Dustin would give Ilia Topuria a hard fight. I actually don't think Dustin's a nightmare matchup for Ilia at all. I think actually Dustin's a tailor-made matchup for Ilia. Predominantly a boxer. Yes, he's southpaw, and that could give Ilia much more of a harder time. But Ilia places his shots a lot better than Dustin. You go look at the way they throw hooks. Dustin Poirier can often throw arm punches. It's very effective. He can double up with his hooks. But Ilia Topuari's placement of his shots and his actual form in his shots, and it's the same with Jack Della Maddalena at working off at angles, Jack Della Maddalena switching off in stances. Those two are a lot better than Dustin, I would argue. But is Dustin not in the top 10 best boxers in the UFC? I think that's a little bit too far. But I actually definitely think someone like Brandon Moreno, Jack Della, Ilia Topuria, who else did I mention? Piotr Yan and maybe Sean O'Malley. I think those guys might be better than he is with the hands. The next hot take we have is longevity is the most important stat in determining greatness. The longer you were champ, more footage of you there is, and more specific game plans are created against you. You also face way more styles, and it's a more consistent criteria. Okay, is longevity the most important factor of being... I like that you included reasoning as well, actually, in that hot take. Fair play to you, and I think it's a pretty good reason. Now, I wouldn't say this is a hot take in my mind. I think this is a very common take, but I definitely think it's slightly contentious, so maybe it is a hot take. I think as a champion, right, you can beat a lot of good names like Dustin Poirier, never won a world title. In my opinion, you can never be near an all-time great debate if you've never won a UFC world title. Unless you were fought in Pride and stuff like that, and you just could never fight in the UFC. Maybe that's a different story. So I wouldn't say names on its own is the most important factor when determining greatness. But what I will say, in my mind, names as a champion mean more than longevity, in my opinion. For example, you can have... But then do longevity and names go hand in hand? I'm not sure. Like you might be right there. I don't know. It's very tough to say. Let me know in the comments what you think. It's not very easy to say. Longevity is very, very important, and I agree it's vital. You do need to have longevity. Guys that defend the belt once, you know, they're never considered the best champions, even if they defeated a great name to get there. Cody Garbrandt, he's a good example. Leon Edwards, he had 2 defences, but they were very unspectacular. And so, you know, people don't look back on that reign kindly. Kamaru Usman had plenty of longevity. He had plenty of longevity, but what people are starting to mention when they look back at Usman's career now is the lack thereof of names. Now, he beat a lot of good names. He had a very long win streak, but Jorge Masvidal maybe wasn't on his level. Jorge Masvidal maybe wasn't as good as we thought he were back then. Gilbert Burns also very good, but probably not quite at that level. But I would argue that's one of Usman's best wins. The problem with Usman is he never really fought another, apart from Tyron Woodley, he never really fought another top absolute pound-for-pound killer. I mean, the Colby Covington win. Colby Covington's career, I think Colby Covington was a good win, but his career wasn't very good. So do you factor that in as a good win? I mean, Usman had the longevity, but what stops Usman from being above Demetrius Johnson, right? You could say longevity. So maybe you're right in that factor, but what stops Kamaru Usman from being above GSP? I mean, he had finishes in title fights. He lapped his division almost in title fights. GSP has longevity, but he also has a lot of great names. So I wouldn't say longevity. I think it's up there with being the most important factor, but I wouldn't say it's the most important factor. For me, absolutely names. Who have you beaten? Was your competition good? I think that's why Demetrius Johnson never gets put above GSP, for example. I think that's an even better example, actually. Demetrius Johnson never gets put above GSP because I think people look back at DJ's career and think, there's not as many names there as there is GSP. And Demetrius Johnson had better title performances. But for me, people always remember who you beat, more so than how long you held the belt, more so than how well you performed. It's always who you beat. In my mind, that's the most important thing as a champion. But then again, you can beat a lot of great names, as I mentioned, like Dustin Poirier, and never have won a UFC world title. And unfortunately, that will hurt your career all time. But you lot, let me know what you thought of these hot takes. Do you agree with my points? Do you disagree with my points? Let me know in the comments, and I'll hopefully be able to check more next week. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.